the UN right now, considering the planetary boundaries, which there are 9, 3 are in crisis, which is biodiversity, climate, and pollution.
Yes.
So this is what we call the triple crisis.
Yes.
That we must really address in a more cohesive and accelerated fashion.
สวัสดีค่ะยินดีต้อนรับกลับมาสู่ Mindful Business Podcast กับแพรพิรมนะคะนายกสมาคมส่งเสริมจริยธรรมและธรรมาภิบาลไทยหรือ Create ค่ะวันนี้แพรเป็นเกียรติอย่างยิ่งนะคะที่จะได้มาสัมภาษณ์เมนทอร์ของแพรแนะนำคุณ Robert Steele ค่ะสวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ
Robert ช่วยแนะนำตัวหน่อยได้ไหมคะก่อนที่เราจะเปลี่ยนเป็นภาษาอังกฤษ
ภาษาอังกฤษ okay. My name is Robert Steele and I've been in Thailand I think a little over 28 years.So my Thai should be better, but it's okay, but probably for this podcast. I've been here for quite a long time, starting working in the environment sector, and that has morphed over this 28 years into working really in systems and system thinking around sustainability, the nexus of sustainability, biodiversity, climate change, and basically system transformation. And right now I live in Chiang Mai. I lived first here in Bangkok for 14 years.I'm starting out with Taoiset, which is very famous NGO. I worked for Taoiset for 8 years, learned so much about how to navigate the politics, the cultural aspects, the environmental challenges here in Thailand, and to really fall in love with the country. But eventually, my heart is in nature, and Chiang Mai afforded me the chance to live closer to nature and to also work there and to be a regional consultant here in ASEAN and Asia Pacific on sustainability and biodiversity and climate.
Yes. So besides having taught me a whole bunch of things about sustainable development and sustainable business practices, and especially systems thinking, you've been doing a lot of work for various international agencies from GIZ, the German Development Corporation, to Asian Development Bank, right? And the UN. Maybe you can tell the audience about like what the project that you're working on right now, like very briefly before we get into our questions.
Most recent period, I've been working with UNEP.
Environment Program of the UN.
United Nations Environment Program, and working as a policy analyst, using the system thinking skill and perspective that I have to basically help the UN in Indonesia as well as regionally to develop cohesive strategies between the different UN organizations so that they are addressing biodiversity, for instance, as more cohesive one voice and having coordinated strategies, even though they have different mandates. You might have UN Women or UN Habitat, UNIDO, which is working with the business and industry, but how all of them have an impact on biodiversity. And the UN right now, considering the planetary boundaries, which there are 9, 3 are in crisis, which is biodiversity, climate, and pollution.
Yes.
So this is what we call the triple crisis.
Yes.
That we must really address in a more cohesive and accelerated fashion. So that's what I've been working on. Most recently, I've been also focusing on oceans, because especially in ASEAN, many of the countries have long coasts, and a lot of the livelihoods of people are tied to the marine sector, coastal marine sector.
Fishing.
So now it's how do we leverage this marine sector for economic growth and development and sustainable livelihoods without damaging the natural resource base and biodiversity and ecosystem functional
like how
services.
To be able to fish and make money without ruining the environment.
Yeah, basically. And it's both like fisheries, offshore fisheries, but also aquaculture. And it's more, again, a cohesive strategy, because you can't just segment the coastal region and the marine area from the inland, right? Because as we know, everything moves down.
Yeah.
Right? So it's kind of like what we call a ridge to reef. Ridge meaning the uplands.
Oh, like ridge. Okay.
Ridge, R-I-D-G-E.
Yeah.
To a reef.
Okay.
Because there's this continuum of energy and material flow, right? I think most obvious what we see, especially if we love the sea, we see the plastics.
Yes.
And they originate upstream.
Yes.
Like the vector is rivers oftentimes. So, and then where the impact is in the oceans and the reefs and the mangroves, the seagrass beds, and we see the result of that. In Thailand, for example, one of the crisis situations we're facing is the death of dugong.
Yeah, the dugong.
Yeah.
La Payun.
Yes, which is quite in a critical state right now. So it is really crucial that we understand a more broader system perspective, that it's not just a problem of the ocean and the coast, but it's also a problem all the way back to the cities, and
Sure.
even above where I live in Chiang Mai, where the rivers start. Yeah.
Yes. All right. I really wanted to interview you today because I've been thinking a lot about systems thinking and also the rise of electric vehicles in Thailand and in Asia and in the U.S. and even Europe, right? And the Chinese EVs are doing really well. There's so many brands, and I was thinking, like the Chinese Communist Party. Do they think of systems thinking? Do they think of sustainable development? And that's why I invited you to do this podcast with me. And so the first question is really basic. Can you explain systems thinking and why it's important for sustainability?
What is system thinking? Why is it important? Should it really be one of the crucial tools for the 21st century, which the World Economic Forum has identified system thinking as a core skill for the future, to navigate the future.
Thank God we're not the lonely ones anymore.
I mean, we've all, as kids, and some people still to this day as adults, love to putting together jigsaw puzzles.
Yeah.
But often what is the biggest challenge, you just have the pieces.
Yeah.
And you're looking for patterns, right?
Yes.
Patterns of
Same
color
colors.
or, just lines or whatever
Right.
it is, shades. But often helps if you can see the bigger picture, which,
Like what are we trying to make here?
yeah, so having the cover of that
Yeah.
puzzle
Right.
box is always helpful,
The
right?
objective.
So that's kind of what system thinking is like. It's like you have to have the bigger picture in mind to understand the coherence and how the pieces connect together.
Yeah.
If we just start with pieces, then oftentimes if we're looking at more in the business sector or the policy sector, then we're making strategies that are not aligned
Yeah.
with other sectors, right? So there can be massive trade-offs and bottlenecks because of that. So system thinking is the ability to zoom out and see the dynamics of what is going of the system itself. And then a key thing is that we tend to focus as more siloed thinkers, because I think we've all been conditioned in our modern education system to be specialists.
Right.
And I'm not against specialists. We need specialists to drill down. But when we do that, the problem solving that we make doesn't necessarily link or align with other problems.
We don't collaborate.
Yeah. And so solutions can also, and I think oftentimes in that kind of perspective, create other problems, what we call in system thinking unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences.
Yeah. So we tend to focus on events.
Yes.
And I'll use the metaphor of an iceberg. Let's say it's floating in the sea.
Yes.
Right? Made famous by the Titanic movie,
Yes.
right? It brought down the Titanic. But what you see is like the 10% above the surface.
Yeah.
And we tend to focus on those events. It might be COVID or pollution or maybe some terrorism event or whatever, corruption event, right? And it's in the news and we focus on, and we try to put out the fire. We arrest people or we try some solution. And it might work for the short term, but oftentimes that fades away and the behavior returns. So we're not actually solving, we're just putting a Band-Aid on it, because we have to go deeper to understand what is driving that behavior response. And in system thinking, we need to go down below the surface of the water to understand what are the patterns of behavior, what we call trends, right? Looking at long-term trends and then matching those and are basically asking the question, what are the system elements and how are they put together that creates this behavior?
How are they connected?
Exactly. And the dynamics of cause and effect, and even more important, where is the feedback?
Right.
And what is the length of that feedback in terms of time horizons?
Can you explain the feedback loop a little bit more?
Yeah, so there's two types of feedback, but feedback is basically where things circle around
Yes.
and basically drive the original sort of action. Either it can decrease the rate, or I would say the velocity, or the time that something happens, the response time, or it can accelerate it. And most of what we see are accelerations. Population growth is an exponential growth curve. Climate change, right? Those are all reinforcing feedback that are coming back to the original problem. So if we take climate change, right? We, in the modern world, we want to be comfortable. Everything is based on energy, and it's based on fossil fuels, right? And so that produces greenhouse gases, right? And then greenhouse gases are heating the planet. So things get hotter and more uncomfortable. So we use more energy to make life more bearable,
Yeah.
which produces more CO2 and more greenhouse gases, which accelerates that more.
Yeah.
So you see, and it comes back around to keep driving that problem higher and higher to a point where you can get to what we call the tipping point, right? Where then it's almost impossible to reverse.
Yes.
And that's what we're trying to avoid. Now, again, going back to feedback, I just mentioned what we call a reinforcing feedback mechanism, where things reinforce the power and the magnitude of that response. Okay, so in terms of reinforcing, as we say, we're speeding things up or even decreasing but it's a reinforcing type of mechanism. The other type of feedback is called balancing. That is something that's more like a regulator. In a building, if we set our thermostats to say 25 degrees, and as more people come into the room, things heat up, and the thermostat reads that sensor, and it increases or it lowers the temperature, right? Yeah. But then it gets cooler, and there's a regulator that stops it from getting cooler to maintain that 25 degrees. Right. That's a balancing type of feedback. It's something that allows the system to stay within the limits.
So reinforcement is like it doesn't regulate.
Doesn't regulate.
Yeah.
And it's
so
not to say that
it can lead to the tipping point.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm not saying that reinforcing feedback is bad.
Okay.
Because sometimes we need to speed up change, right? We want to increase awareness and behavior change towards, say, plastics or fossil fuels, right? But the thing is that if we understand systems and we understand the dynamics of how this works, we know when to intervene. And that's the key, right? We don't allow just runaway growth, right? Because we have this profit margin and just growth mentality. But if we just grow without any sort of understanding of where those limits are, the social, ecological, and even economic limits of the capacity of a system, then, we get things like massive inequalities in our society where wealth concentrates at the very, very top. But then most of the population, they're not seeing that benefit from, say, GDP growth. Right?
Yeah. Okay. So let's get into China.